switch over to Ubisoft or Ubisoft, whichever you prefer. I got an email from them, and they want to suggest that gamers get comfortable not owning their games. And this is actually an interesting conversation because in the world of like Game Pass and these subscription services, does it matter that much for owning games? How often do we go back and play some of our old games? Because we do a video game podcast and we talk about the newest games that come out. How often are we going back and playing games that we own? How important is that to you? But this is the quote: gamers are used to, a little bit like DVD, having and owning their games. That's the consumer shift that needs to happen. So I'm interested to hear what you guys think about this Ubisoft senior executive who said they need to shift over from owning to getting their subscription push.
I think it's very interesting. I posted this story on the Sandbox Gamers / WonderRob TikTok, and the comments blew up with dozens of people commenting on it saying, "I'm never buying an Ubisoft game again. Boycott Ubisoft. They can't make good games. This is dumb." But I think a lot of people are taking the quote, the headline, out of context. Basically, for the same reason that you just said, Factor. And I personally don't see any sort of issue with this. Just to clear it up, just in case any listeners aren't understanding what's being said, is implying the games that you play on Game Pass, the games that you play on the Ubisoft subscription service, you're paying a monthly fee, you're playing the game, you're beating it, and you move on, versus buying a hard copy or a digital copy of the game and keeping it forever. Personally, I don't see any sort of issue with this business model because of the same reason Factor said. Rarely do I go back and play a game after I've beaten it or I've decided I'm done with the game. Especially these days when I'm a dad, I've got limited time, and there's just so many great games coming out. I don't need to go back and play a Breath of the Wild again. You know what I mean? 120-hour game. I'm a very big pusher for these subscription services, especially with Ubisoft, which in my experience, I'm not a big fan of Assassin's Creed, but I want to give it a shot. But if I'd paid $70 for that Assassin's Creed game and I wasn't that happy with it, I would be pretty upset that I spent $70 versus the $14.99 or whatever the subscription or service cost is, just to dip my toes in. So I think this is the way of the future. I wouldn't be surprised if other video game companies outside of Ubisoft, Sony, and Microsoft went this way, but I don't see any sort of problem with this.
Yeah, and so I guess I'll give my opinion, which is not exactly the opposite of Rob's, but just a different. Because I agree with Rob, I do, and me and him both did the Ubisoft subscription for that latest Assassin's Creed. I even finished the game, running through it, and that definitely has its place. My only problem with it is more of who it's coming from, and it always. So if this is not my game, when I download it, when I pirate it, is that not stealing it, right? Like they wouldn't see it the other way. And my other problem with it is it's similar, to the argument of some of the movies on the streaming services, right? Like so HBO, I would say one of the best HBO shows in the last decade or so was the Watchmen series that came out. It's one of my favorites. And I think Vactor, I remember you liked it. I'm sure, it seemed like that was, kind of universally praised at the time. I feel, but I really like that, and I can't watch it, or unless they've changed something in the last week, it's off HBO Max, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if can you get physical media that probably, but if you didn't, what would you do, right? I remember it's just. I get it, but at the same time, I need to be able to get this content too, and I feel like the next step, right? So if people let them, like, if they let them get away with saying this stuff without critiquing it, I feel like the next step is like basically, you know, okay, so we're never going to give you a physical copy of a game, or we're never going to give you like a download, which I don't think will happen. I think obviously we'll always have like a way to get a download of a game independent of even a Steam or, you know, platform for it to be on. You should be able to get a full copy of the game, right? And I just, I don't know, it just feels weird to me, and I've been doing a lot of stuff with the emulation on my little handheld RG35X or whatever it was. And Rob,
The
you got the
Ally.
analog. Yeah. And to me, like, what keeps those alive is people, preserving those games. Because let's be honest, if you want to play a lot of games, if you want to go back, like, you guys have the boys, right? If you want to go back and play some of those games in pretty much the easiest way, right? Like in a way that's not too expensive for most families, it's probably going to be, through an emulator and like obtaining, copies of the games online. So to me, I just feel like I understand what they're saying and I agree, and I do pay the subscription services. I want that. But I don't think that should be the only way to get these games. I mean, I sent you guys a link to it, the gamehistory.org. They preserve everything for video games. They do even like bootleg, unreleased, all kinds of stuff. They have libraries of information there. And I think it's important, like video games are something I obviously care about. And I just want, everything saved, whether it was meant to be released or not, or if it's out there, you should be able to play a game. And I mean, I think of things like some of my favorites of all time, right? Like, like Metal Gear Solid 4. If you want to play that game, I mean, go play it. You're gonna have to find a PlayStation 3. You're gonna have to find a legit copy of the game. Like, it's not gonna be the easiest thing. You can't just stream that right now, right? So maybe if they have everything, right. But maybe when they have everything on there, I would agree with this. But until then, I mean, I feel like there should be a way that somebody out there can get these games independent of, the stream service.
What do you think,
Johnny?
Johnny?
You said you signed up for the Sony one. You said,
yeah, I did. The Sony PlayStation Plus, whatever it is, to stream Final Fantasy VII Remake, because it hadn't come out on PC yet, or it had just come out, and I'm like, I don't want to pay $70 for this. Oh, it's on their streaming service on PC. So I tried it with my old DualShock 3 and it didn't work. So I borrowed a buddy's DualSense from his PlayStation 4, hooked it up to my computer and played it with that flawless. Had no issues, no lag, no input issues. It played, felt like it was installed on my computer. And then when I finished it, I just ended the subscription.
yeah.
That's like you were talking when you first were talking about Indiana Jones. The way you phrased it, I was like, wait, is this only going to be on Game Pass? But then I saw it's like wish list and whatnot. But I would not be surprised. We have console exclusives. I would not be surprised if at some point in the future, when are we going to get our first game that is exclusive to Game Pass or to, EA Plus or Ubisoft? All these services are Plus now, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Or Game Pass or Sony's or whatever. I wouldn't be surprised if we see it sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
You were talking about replaying. It's the same thing. Like Mass Effect, I'll replay every now and again, 1, 2, and 3. But I'm like, I probably, because of the nature of games, I'm dating myself a little bit here. I started with an Atari 2600. That was my first console.
Oh, wow.
So I probably have more multi playthroughs in like Choplifter, River Raid, and Pole Position than I do like games that came out later.
Jeff, the
Contra
Atari
on the
2600, that was an early video game console, Jeff. Before the Nintendo 64.
Before
Nintendo.
Rob's time.
No, how dare you?
I think we had the 2600, and then there was the Atari 5200 and the 70-something hundred. And I know I had Atari 2600, and I think we ended up with a 5200 before we got an NES.
Nice.
And then I went on from there. But yeah.
Yeah, I remember my cousin was the only person I knew that had an Atari. So when I went over to her house, that's how I played. And I remember that Star Wars game, the one where you're shooting the
Oh
AT-AT
yeah,
legs.
you're just the you're just the snow speeder side scrolling
Yes,
shoot.
yes,
You had to shoot the little flashing piece of the AT-AT's head.
yes.
I had
So
that game.
yeah,
I
but I
had
think
ET too, the worst video game of all time.
yes, got buried in the
Jeez.
landfill. But so Jeff, you're saying for preservation purposes, you like well, you don't like physical media though, right? You're all digital.
Right. And it doesn't have to be like I don't have a bunch of game discs laying around, but I have, hundreds and hundreds of gigs of of video games, on my computer. And
He's
it's
a digital hoarder.
yeah, yeah. So it doesn't need to be like I don't need the game in a cart or a disc or whatever, but I feel like you should be. I just don't want it to be only streaming, only locked into the like. I should be able to buy the game. Period.
Mhm.
There shouldn't be a $15 subscription only for everything, and it's just to have the option. I'm sure though that option will always be there, but I feel like when people start to say this, like they take away ownership from people that are putting in the money. To me, it feels a little dirty. And like I said, if it's not my game and I pirate it, then it's not stealing, right? I'm not.
You wouldn't steal a car, Jeff.
Yeah,
Exactly.
So
Or would
it's
I?
you think too about though, like Steam is probably safe, right? If you buy a digital game from Steam, you're probably
Right. Yeah.
not going to lose access to it before you die. But this is something that a lot of people were complaining about with Nintendo shutting down the marketplaces for the DS and the Wii U.
Mhm.
Is that there's going to be games that were available on those platforms that now there's not going to be any way to access them at all going forward.
Right.
They're going to live on the consoles they're downloaded on, and that's it. Once those consoles eventually succumb to the passage of time, no
Mhm.
more do those games exist.
Right.